This is the Quip and Quill podcast. I'm your host, Devin Rue, professional fantasy cartographer and illustrator.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacky. I am a TTRPG writer, designer, editor, and I am also currently the line editor for Fallout, the tabletop RPG for Modiphius. So what that means is that I'm there from conception all the way to pretty much release. Usually, like, there's a little bit of like where we lead into release where I'm not really there for, other than just to make sure that everything is there and we can just send it off. But yeah, so usually if you're dealing with like a publisher or something like that, usually there's like a developmental phase that will happen, and that's usually what is basically where all the planning stages are. So that's usually where all the product planning happens, where the projections happen. Depending on your depending on the publisher, there might be some bit of feasibility involved. And what that means is just the internally companies may have a way to determine whether or not a product may or may not do well, or they'll compare previous years of sales with similar products, or they might do something along the lines of, okay, well, who else has done something similar like this, and can we compare what their can we use that as like a model of success for us and see how that can work for us, right? And sometimes it's something new entirely, and that requires a little bit more of assessment, risk assessment, and like what kind of plans and goals are we expecting from this. And then from that point on, then we move into basically the hiring or execution phase. And so usually you'll have like a project manager start developing, start orchestrating like how, like the timelines of how long things take, what the deadlines are, so and then set those mile markers for the projects. And from there you get into the phase of like assembling the writers. So like if you're doing something big, like if you ever look at something big from like Wizards of the Coast, like when they do like a big campaign book, you see like there's a laundry list of writers and editors. It's a big team, it's a big ensemble, and that involves a project manager, so either be like the creative lead, or they'll have like an actual project manager who will accrue and gather the teams and the writers choose, and then usually they'll already have like some kind of brief or outline or plan ready for that comes from the project leads, that they will then dictate to the writers and delegate responsibilities. And when the writing has like a set amount of deadlines, every publisher is different. From my personal experience as a freelancer, so it can range from, but usually, I would say sometimes the writing process can be anywhere from like for a small book, like when I say small book, I mean less than like 200 pages, probably like a month and a half. For a big book, like that's like 250 to 300, you could probably see it closer to like 3 months, maybe 4 months, depending. It depends how intricate it is, right?
Right.
And it depends on like a lot of other factors. But like, so average though, you're looking at like 3 to 6 months is the average. That's not the gold standard. That's just for like the most part, you're expecting 3 to 6 months.
Right.
And then that will then move into the editing phase. And editing can either happen during the writing phase, because usually you'll have writers writing at different rates and schedules. So you can have it where you can stagger the editing process along with the writing process, so you can minimize the time on that. And so that's usually one step that will happen in some publications. And then the editing process, you'll have different phases of editing, because there's different kinds of editing. So you'll have developmental editing, which is more structural, big picture, and so that usually happens in the early stages of like the first drafts, and then when they start moving into the revisions and things like that, that's when the copy editors will come in to make to make the more grammatical changes, clean up the sentences, make them sound more cohesive, make them set. If there's a style guide for a publication, then the copy editors will adjust things to fit the style guide. Albeit, though, the writers also should be writing things in a style guide if there is a style guide provided. And then you will, then from that point on, everything kind of differs based on who you're working for, your publication, the company. Because after copy editing, it will usually go into layout, typically, and then from layout, the layout. So our commission happens usually at the same time writing will happen, or some point after the initial writing has happened. So that because the project manager will usually have to commission art, or have the art director commission art, and and that's usually where. So some publications they'll only commission art after the revised drafts are in. Some might do it when the first drafts are in, because maybe it's like a cover or something. They really want to get that nailed in early, and things like that. Like especially like the more intricate art pieces, perhaps they might have to commission those a little earlier. Or if they're only working with like a small group of artists, and thus the artists have a larger packet that they usually have to send in. Then in that case, they have to also do it a little early. They might do it a little earlier, just because they need to give the artist enough time to do the art, get it approved, and then like submit all of that in. So usually when you look at like a big TTRPG book, you'll usually see like also between the writers, the artists, the editors, there's like a massive amount of people involved. Right. Like if you ever look at any Wizards of the Coast book, like especially the campaign books, it's like what average 8 to 8 writers at most, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Artists easily over 10.
Yes.
Editors will range from like 2 to 4, depending on the scale of what it is and whether or not. Because sometimes, especially if they're hiring contractors like freelancers, it also depends on availability. So that could also affect those sorts of decisions. And pretty much like once you get into the layout phase and everything, then proofreaders are coming in to check the final bits, make sure that like, oh, there's like a hanging sentence that got moved over for a column, like that should be, you might want to change the sentence to fix that, and things like that. Also like to check for style guide, make sure everything's adherent to the style guide, make sure that any glaring grammatical errors be fixed. Typos are the big ones that usually proofreaders are looking for. But even when they have to rewrite a sentence, like they're not there to do copy editing, so the thing is they're a little bit limited, in my opinion, in terms of like what they can rewrite, like suggest for rewrites. They can still rewrite if the suggestion warrants like a humongous rewrite of a sentence, then of course they'll probably suggest it still, but it's just that is something that, because copy editors can still miss things too, so it can still happen. It's not always a thing. Like I will say, I've been very fortunate that usually a lot of whenever I'm hired for proofreading, I don't really catch. I don't feel too terrible if I don't catch as many errors. But usually I still find plenty. Because it happens. Because when you're reading something that's like 200,000 words, which is like a 200 plus page book, it's like you're gonna miss something. It's not unheard of. There will always be a typo somewhere. There'll always be like a period missing somewhere, or a comma missing that probably should be there. Commas are subjective a little bit. But or it's like anything you can still find something in error, but it's just it's gonna be a lot. The scale is a lot different than like a copy editor, where you're gonna be like, I'm rewriting this entire we're revising this entire paragraph because it does not flow coherently and it needs to be clearer. So So that's usually how's the different.
So this kind of leads to an interesting thought. So can we talk about how errors or how bad takes end up in a final product? So we recently just went through this with Wizards of the Coast and everything else, where, you know, and it's not just a matter of hiring cultural advisors or, you know, sensitivity readers, because it obviously even some of that doesn't even get to those. So how do those things end up in the final product?
I can say that for a lot of the times, especially for like some of the stuff for Wizards of the Coast, that for more recent history, for that kind of thing, I feel is the fact that sometimes the copy editors or the proofreaders or the editors, whoever, because it can happen in any of those stages. I don't know if whether or not either somebody voiced, because usually I know from me personally, if I see something that is probably either culturally and or sensitivity wise, like something that's like, this is probably not the best term you should be using, I'll at least flag it.
Right.
Some publishers they actually have it in their style guides for like to look out for those sort of things, because it can still happen. And normally that will at least be looked at or addressed, but like I don't know what happened, like especially in the situation for Wizards for some of their more recent incidents. I don't know I cannot say anything. I don't know. I can't speak for the people who worked on it.
Right.
But right. I can only surmise that either somebody voiced, if nobody voiced anything, then that is definitely a lapse in judgment from the editing process. Right. Because I'm assuming there's at least going to be several different pairs of eyes looking at, besides the project leaders and the proofreaders, like that. Right. Somehow that got grossly overlooked. And you know, if that and I think that's part of the reason why they said in like in a later press release why they wanted to address the process, like their editorial process again, because apparently there must be gaps for where that can fall through. Or at least they think there's gaps that they can fall through. And if it was flagged by somebody, it could have also been ignored, because usually when you're doing editorials, it largely depends on who has the capacity for the authority to overwrite the writing. Right. Because some places the editors are more just like, I can only offer you suggestions, I can't make permanent changes. Versus sometimes in some editorials you can have it where the editors have very strong sense of the power to alter text, and so it really depends on that. And so because I've worked for some where when I'm editing, it's mostly just purely suggestions, and so it is taken at the behest of whoever receives the text and basically makes the decisions of whether to agree to those changes or not. And then there are others where I've worked where it's like I have the authority to make those big changes, and so you know I can alter the text of a writer. And you know sometimes for writers that could be nerve-wracking, because obviously it's like, well, these are not my words anymore, and it's like, you know, sometimes it's a weird slippery slope sometimes with that. And so I can see why usually, which is why you'll typically see in the industry, usually a lot of the editors, what we'll do is like, we'll provide suggestions or edits that are very pretty much just like, here's some suggestions, grammatical errors and things like that. Usually though, I'm a little, like for me personally, like if it's a style guide issue, I'm usually pretty much a little bit firmer in terms of like any kind of pushback from a writer, where it's like, look, I understand that you don't like how this is worded, but this is the style guide. I don't know what else to tell you.
What exactly is a style guide? Like, I mean, yeah. I have a general idea, but like specifically.
So a style guide is usually is basically the publication's outline and guidelines of how the way the words are supposed to be written and the way sentences are structured for a product and for a publication specifically. So
it's not just like in basic English, like.
Well, it is in basic English, but it also has there's certain ways that a sentence needs to be structured, or the way certain word choices are used.
Okay.
So for example, for D&D, they have a 20 some odd page style guide, and that's not all of it too, because they literally because their technical style guide is that they use the Chicago manual style, and then basically the style guide is just the amendments to the manual Chicago style. So basically for D&D's style guide, it's more of the Chicago style manual plus an amendment, and it is a 20-page worth of amendments. And so what it is for Wizards, for D&D specifically, and you can pull this up from DM's Guild or anywhere, because it exists there. And basically what it tells you is specific word choices. It tells you what words need to be capitalized, what are considered game terms, and how certain sentences need to be structured. For example, in the style guide for D&D, usually you'll see the syntax of you'll see a lot of the times, for example, in D&D, you'll see will refer to something like a target, or a creature, but you would never. Those would be the terms we would want to use for a spell or an attack or an ability.
Right.
And you'll usually structure it where it's and you don't want to try to genderize a target. So usually the style guide will recommend just use the word "it's." With the exception of a named NPC or something like that, where gender is affirmed, and that's usually that'll be the exception. But yeah, it's in the style guide where it talks about refer to targets or creatures in spells or abilities and stuff like that. It'll also talk about how to structure. How to format, graphically, how to format things like that. So a style guide could also include how to graphically format things, how spells, if you ever look at a spell entry, that would be part of a style guide, how a spell entry should look. That's in a style guide. How the feat entries are done, that's in the style guide.
It took me a moment. I thought you were talking about actual feet, and then I realized you mean feats.
Feats, yeah.
I was like, why do feet have to be a specific?
Yeah. Also, the weapon entry, magic weapons and items, those would also have they are in the style guide, how to format them and stuff like that. How to do the headings, the headings are a big one. Headings are always a big one. And because the headings are the organization of information, and so that is usually one of the first things you'll ever notice in a style guide. There's and I know for the D.
Oh nope.
They have it.
Go ahead.
Oh, they have they'll have special cases for certain things and for specific topics in the D&D one. But style guides can be either very in depth or they can be very short. It really depends on the publisher. And depends on the project, because sometimes a project might be a new IP or a new thing, right? And from that point, it will usually fall onto either the project lead or one of the main editors to compile some kind of a style guide if they can. And that's usually and usually those will be a lot shorter than 20 pages. They'll be a couple pages maybe, or something like that, or several pages. And it's usually, again, it's just it's a set of guidelines for the editors to understand, for the editors and the writers to understand how they ought to structure the manuscripts, how it should look, how the organization information should flow, and things like that.
So when
all the things that make a game book look really nice on paper, that is really what a style guide does, and make it meaningful.
Do writers need to know that before they submit things to all of you for work, not necessarily a particular project? Like,
it depends. It largely depends on the publication, because like if a publication is coming with something new, and there's like, for example, if it's a new product, they may not have a style guide available. And some publishers, they might have a generic style guide for like all their products. And that'll be like a universal one you use, and there might be an amendment for like an editor or somebody might make an additional amendment style guide for them for that project, just so if that way it's an easier reference point for the editors to do, less so than the writers. So usually most of the time writers, like I said, it really depends on the project. If you're working for certain publications who are very established, they will most likely give you a style guide. And if you're working on like a brand new project, or if you're working on like an indie project, you're probably less likely to see a style guide, and that will either be made after the fact or during the fact of the process. Sometimes or not at all. So that can also happen. But for writers, like, if you're given a style guide, it's encouraged and probably in your contract that you're supposed to actually present a manuscript as desired by the person who hired you.
So if the company that you want to write for has your style guide, even a generic one online, does it, when you get submissions to write for a project, does it impress you more if somebody already knows it and submits it in that style guide, or is it just about the same? Or
it's much better to know the style guide or follow it, because the reason is because if you don't follow a style guide, that means that the editors have to take more time out of their time to basically edit something that you should especially if it's accessible. Like if you're hired and they hand you a style guide and then you hand us back a manuscript that isn't done in following the style guide at all, that tells us a lot of things. One, that you don't follow instructions, first of all. Two, it also means that you don't read any of the documents we send you. And three, or you don't read them carefully enough. Or three, that now we have to spend a lot of time to comb through your document to find all these to basically make your manuscript fit to style.
Right.
And on top of the fact that we have to do all the other editings, like developmental editing, copy editing, all those things. Right. So it adds a lot of time, and for a lot of things, and as you know, Devin, in our industry, we're even though it takes average like 6 months to a year and a half sometimes for a book to come out, the pacing is quite fast for projects.
Yes. Yeah.
And so because the reality is, the production pipeline for most products is you have a 6-month production window.
Yes.
Probably. And so you don't have, project managers, editors in chief, project leads do not like having their projects delayed because of minuscule things that could have been taken care of. Proactively, especially if it's from like the writer side, or especially if and stuff like that. But the reality is because these production timelines are so short, a lot of delays can really add up, and then it causes product delays, release delays, and that is never good for a company, because that affects your bottom line. Because it could cause a situation where a product that you were hoping to release in like the autumn months to come out in the winter, and now you're that might not be an ideal time period for you, and because of various reasons, either because of shipping, because of other competitors, because of the fact that you don't have as many months to accrue capital as you would have had because like if you release something earlier, obviously you have more months within the fiscal year to get some profit back through it, versus if you release it so close to the end of the year, obviously you don't have as much time. So or wherever your fiscal year falls. So
right. How did you get here? What's your origin story in all this?
My origin story.
Yeah.
My origin story. I guess the best way to put it was I guess for the industry in general, like I started out as a fan and a blogger. That was where I made most of my that was where my beginnings were. Mm-hmm. I was a blogger, and then when the opportunity arose for people to create and publish things and sell things in the DM's Guild marketplace, that was kind of where I started dipping my toes into being a creative and writing and creating content and stuff like that. And as time went on, I learned through my mistakes, through my successes, and I started connecting with other people. And then I remember the first real gig I got was working on Pathfinder for Paizo for the Lost Omens Gods and Magic supplement,
right.
And that was like my first like freelance job I ever did. It's a long time ago.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And so I remember I was so nervous when I was working on it, because I've done collaborative work with like other groups and other people, but that's more communal. So it's not, and there's some structure, but it's not to a degree of like dealing with larger publishers, right?
Right.
And so Paizo was my first real big gig, and I remember feeling super nervous as I was trying to get everything done. I must have looked at. I remember I always had the style guide open and going back, like doing alt tabs all the time, like after every other paragraph, just to make sure I was following the style guides and following the formatting. But when I finished everything, I was relieved. I was excited. And I think like almost a little over a year later, the book came out and everything. Now I was just excited to have it, and to see my name on it. And around that time, so between the times it was like, after writing it, because like once I was done writing it, I never got much of an update afterwards. So like I just only that like when they were getting ready to get it published or something like that, or like every couple months they gave like a status update. So like I would probably know a little bit of like what's going on, but other than that,
it's more than us artists get.
Yeah, I know, because sometimes you guys don't hear anything after the okay, we approve it, we'll take it, and usually that's the last time you hear anything, and you'll be lucky to even get a notification of, oh, by the way, here's the release date.
No, seriously, I might hear something. Like oddly enough, I'll hear something at the beginning of a project. They're like, yeah, this has for whatever release date. Mm-hmm. And then I will hear something at best like a month or the month of its release. I'm like, seriously? Yeah. I got like 3 days to fucking prepare.
Yeah.
And usually I'll hear it because of the industry news, not because somebody informed me.
Yep. And that unfortunately does fall on individual publishers, because I know some publishers will like keep the writing teams updated fairly regularly, and then others that usually won't at all. Like you'll never hear from them literally even at release. Like you won't even know. Like I've had I've done work for some projects where I didn't even know it got released, and I'm just going, oh, it got released. Oh, that's nice.
Right. I'm like, what do you mean?
I'm scrambling to social media where I'm gonna be like, I have to like quickly find the tweet, like come up with some kind of like some kind of SEO ishy kind of tweet was like retweet, like quote tweet, and just be like, hey, it's released, go check it out, please do.
I had something to do with this. Not that I knew that it was fucking released, but yeah, I had something to do with this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I vaguely remember that I worked on this.
Right.
Especially
for like the Lord of the Rings stuff, Magic the Gathering cards. I was never told a release date at all. I had to find out when they announced it publicly.
The only reason I knew about anything about Wizards of the Coast for Lord of the Rings is because I'm a Magic the Gathering player. And so obviously I'm more squared in of like when these release dates are. But even I would say though, for the Lord of the Rings though, we didn't really get a real date. It's like we didn't get like a real street date until like 3 to 4 months before. And that's like still pretty late for them usually. Because for the listeners, so for to understand Magic the Gathering's release schedule, first of all, they usually do like around the third quarter of the year, around like August, September, like that time of the year, they'll like give out like a brief release schedule of like what's coming for the first half of the upcoming year.
Yes.
Just to, obviously build hype, get fans ready to, empty more of their pockets, because we don't do that already. Gods. Anyways, so usually you'll have like a vague understanding of like there's what's coming, because they'll usually do like 6 or 7 products they'll mention that are like on the schedule, or at least that they're planning to release, and then a lot of other smaller products that are probably good, maybe valuable, they'll interject that like sporadically throughout the year. But Lord of the Rings is like was one of the bigger like Universal Beyond kind of properties that people were really excited for, because the first two were like Walking Dead and Warhammer, and those had like mixed reception. Like fans loved the Warhammer ones, but it was but also people didn't like it because it just didn't like people had to have a specific kind of aesthetic attachment for Magic and what it's supposed to be, which is like high fantasy and stuff. So Warhammer 40K was like in a weird spot for them, so fans were like had like mixed reception to it, but it was still a good product. But it was just one of those weird things. And then, but Lord of the Rings is like iconic. It defined it literally grandfathered the entirety of literature for the genre. Okay,
yeah,
at least for the last century. The century before it's different, but like for the entirety of the entirety of the 20th century was literally a lot of it is inspired by Tolkien's work. And so D&D is inspired by Tolkien's work. What do you want? Right. And it's like so of course it's important, it's big, it's high fantasy, thousands of fans, and so like millions of fans. So like so when you're thinking about like the fact that they don't tell much about it until like 2 to 3 months before. And the thing is too, with Wizards' release schedule of Magic the Gathering products now, like even the diehards are getting like to the point where we're like, oh, it's coming out this month. I don't even know what's coming up next.
Right.
So for a lot of us, it's like it's already hard enough for even the more diehard fans, the content creators, to even just keep track of what is releasing at the rate that Wizards of the Coast releases Magic products. And this is one that's like, I would say it's a bigger deal just because like this is like a large fan base. It's Lord of the Rings. It's a large fan base, and it has a lot of crossover. So you're not just going to get just regular Magic the Gathering players. You're going to get people who are fans of Lord of the Rings because they want to collect those things, because they know you're never going to see this again, probably. So you want to collect it even if you don't play Magic. And that's just one of which is totally valid, by the way. And it's like. And it's just like, of course, so you have a lot of crossover, and it's just like, for even diehards, it's like, wait, we're already in Lord of the Rings? Because we just, like, for anyone who does pay attention to Magic, it's like, we just wrapped up one of the largest, like, Infinity War Avengers kind of storyline, and and then we move straight into Lord of the Rings like a month and a half later, and we're just like, oh, okay.
Right.
And it's so like, oh, okay.
There's a story that goes. So this is really horrible, and I'm really sorry for anyone who's Magic the Gathering fan. I only don't play because, one, because when I was younger and the game really started to take off, or at least amongst my friends, I watched people sink a ridiculous amount of money that I did not have at the time. And I was like, wow, this is like crack. I probably should not pick this up.
Devin, Magic the Gathering literally coined the term cardboard crack. It's not a lie.
Right.
It is not a lie. All right.
And I'm already a really huge gamer, so there's some things I just know to avoid, because it's like this is gonna end up really bad for me. So I do get asked by a lot of people, like, getting started in the industry, and a lot of what we wish we knew kind of things.
Oh yeah.
And there's a laundry list for most of us. So So whether you want to talk about what specifically for what you do now or how you just got started in general, what do you wish you knew before you started? Other than like that you were not going to make a lot of money whatsoever doing this?
Yeah, that one we kind of figured out pretty quickly, didn't we? A lot of
right, yeah.
I think the big one is, I think going in, I never really, when I like compare then and now, I think the big one was I never fully like understood the full scale of like a production, like the producing like of a TTRPG, like from beginning to end, and having to have been a part of that multiple times, and now in a more frequent position where I do have to interact with it from pretty much like beginning to end. And so it really tells you like how much work is put into a lot of these products, and then realizing that we are still undercharging for how much they are worth given the amount of work that's put in.
Right.
And I think like, I know Wizards of the Coast recently said that they're going to be doing a price increase, and people were upset about it. And I'm just going, the cost of labor, and I'm like, if you want people to get paid fairly, and also the fact that the rise of cost of paper, shipping, and everything else, and is also going up. It's like, it's kind of expected. I don't know why you all thought that. Why do you think this is like the fact that they've been paying $60 at all for the entirety of this time is a miracle in itself?
Right.
And
like, I want to give a little bit of perspective to the cost of art alone.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who gets hired often to do any of the artwork and stuff, like a full world map, depending on who I'm working with, is anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000. Most character art is done between 300 to I think the average is like 1,200.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual at all, and it all depends on like how much is being done, how much work, Same thing with like landscapes or scene design is same thing. We're talking about $1,000, or more, depending on the piece. And time-wise, one of the things that I'll hear a lot, like, oh, well, that sounds like plenty of money, except for the fact that it's not. To get paid for a world map takes, for me to create a world map, it's anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the level of detail that we're going into. So at best, I might be paid $1,000 a week, but more likely I'm paid like far less than that,
Yeah.
And that's you can only do so many projects a year, or get contacted to do them. So regardless, it's feast or famine. You have money that you have to hope stretches out for the time that you don't have any income coming, or don't have anything else going on, which is one of the reasons why Patreon is so huge to artists.
Yep.
But just production-wise, a book for the art alone is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Much less everything else, much less the writing and the physical, productions of it. But the cost of the book, the physical book itself, isn't where the biggest costs are.
No.
And I think that people entirely forget that, and that's one of the reasons why everyone's like, oh, it's just a PDF, because to you it's just a non-tangible digital item. You don't think it's that big of a deal, and you think that paper would cost more, but that it's kind of like statistically, excuse me, there we go. One of the things that always surprises people when we talk about like how much things actually cost for like a restaurant, let's say, the majority of their bills, their food cost is only 10% of their overall bills and everything else. So it's kind of like the same thing with these books and PDFs. The actual physical books are far less compared to all the other expenses you have. And that has to all come before you could have a PDF, much less a physical book.
Yeah, and that's one of those things like people have to understand is like they technically speaking, especially if like the publication owns a website to distribute their own PDFs, one, they don't have to pay any overheads, which is one of the things that like, or because otherwise you would have to put it in a marketplace, and then you have to pay you have to pay some sort of fee to attach to it. And so the thing is, like, if you're even then, like, so if you're doing digital, the profit margin is obviously much more favorable, because if you own your own website and you're hosting it and then you're distributing your own PDFs, well, obviously anything you make comes straight to you. But but the thing is, there's a lot of the production value of what you're trying to do, especially for a lot of these bigger companies, right? Customers expect to also have physical products, and the physical product world, unfortunately, is actually where the margin of profit is probably the smallest, because you have to figure, printing is already expensive as it is in general, and it's only gotten worse through the pandemic, because of shipping reasons, labor reasons, and the fact that paper is astronomically expensive now, and soon to be ink, apparently. And so it's just like, so you have all those factors to factor in. You also have the factoring of like where people do their publishing, right? A lot of TTRPGs based in the United States, a lot of the TTRPG companies based in the United States do a lot of their printing through China, and so they have to deal with the freight, they have to deal with the cargo, the storage, and the thing is also if you're dealing with like another country, you're dealing with their cultures and their holidays, their other situations, any of the political issues that's going on at the same time. So like you have a myriad of variables that can inevitably cause more money to be spent. And then the thing is, even when they do get to the United States, you have to deal with distribution. So you have to pay the distributor to house, store, and ship your stuff. Right. And if you're a larger publisher, then obviously you also have deals with like big distributors like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like on top of it. So you have book deals with them, so they get a cut somewhere, somehow, maybe up front, so they can get it, or whatever. And so you're owing in that department as well. And in the end of the day, by the time it comes from a concept that came out probably 15 months ago to your bookstore or comic book store or game store, and then it's just like you're paying like $60 when the totality of it is like massively much more.
Right. And we're not even factoring things like marketing and all the other after creation expenses.
Like all the marketing marketing in itself is like it's solely dependent on the scale of the publisher who does it. Like we know WotC has the budget for it because they do it, and but some others don't, and they have to, but they still have most of the publishers who can afford it will have like a marketing team or a social media team of some variety. right? And so they obviously have to pay salary and wages on top of it. Then there's the allocation of time, right? The allocation of time to build the marketing assets. Because surprise, it takes time to do that. It's not something you can just do within 20 seconds. It does take time. And
as much as we'd all like to believe that Canva can fucking magically make us graphics for all of our posts, that doesn't work.
I know. And so, so it's just one of those things. Like, no, you have to go through. There's processes, there's steps, and you have so that's why usually sometimes for marketing they need like anywhere from 3 to 5 months uptime to get all of that ready to go, and so it's just one of those things you have to figure, like, the cost of a $60 TTRPG book is just minuscule compared to the scale of money you have to spend for the stuff after the writing and the editing. Because the writing, the editing, and the art are still kind of like only like what, maybe we'll say generously a third, maybe half for some instances, depending on the publisher. Like probably like a third of like not even a third, maybe more like a quarter. Will be more realistic. It's like especially for WotC, it's probably like not even 10%. So it's like,
see, now I'm under the impression that's entirely opposite. So the people that I talk to who do a lot of the book, not necessarily just with WotC, but in general, their art and writers are their biggest expense.
Yeah,
and then,
that's fair.
Right. And then everything after that, then second to that would be their editors, and although, I mean, obviously printing is expensive, but I'm just referring to like just creating PDFs.
Yeah,
like it's so all
from
this
the
to
PDF
say, like,
standpoint, from PDF standpoint, I would say, then for PDFs, like most of your expenses is the artists and the writers first, and then the editors after. Yeah, for sure, definitely.
Right. And if the PDF that you're creating is exactly like the book, only it's just not in tangible form, that still means that it's very expensive. And it's not to say like Wizards isn't making money off of their books. They clearly are, or else they wouldn't be doing it. However, looking at the numbers, it still costs the same amount to do the original work, which means that they aren't pulling any profit or very little with the PDF than they are, with the books and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, from a business standpoint, the more that we pay for our PDFs, the more that however we choose to consume the stuff that for our games, whether it's books, tangible, or PDFs or not, the more that we actually pay for them, the more likely our writers and artists get paid adequately.
Yeah.
And that's important. Or editors and everything else, because there's, obviously far more than writers and artists that are doing this.
Oh yeah.
If we're going to talk about, especially in this industry, everyone earning a living wage, this is a hobby industry. This is a luxury industry. It is not a necessity, even as much as some of us, obviously it's very important to our lives or our livelihood or whatever. For in comparison to all the other things that we have to buy and everything in our lives to survive, obviously we don't have to. And even more so because this industry, or this hobby, I should say, is so very do-it-yourself. You can write all of your own stories, create your own monsters, make your own maps, create your own, characters. Like, you technically don't need to buy anything. And because of that, it means that this industry isn't as steady of an income as most other industries are.
Right.
There's a reason that a lot of us artists do not stay specifically in the TTRPG community, because we can't survive doing just this type of art.
You're right.
It's impossible. We don't get paid nearly enough. We don't earn a living wage. half of us barely make minimum wage, if that.
Yeah.
You know? And to have people constantly scoff at how much, $4,000 for a world map, what the fuck? Listen, if I could do this for free, I absolutely would. I love doing what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my worst day doing this for a living beats my best day doing anything else.
Yeah.
You know, I live for this. I'm very passionate about my art. I really, I can't live without it, even if I have tried. Mm-hmm. So, given the opportunity, sure, I would love to do maps for free. You know, I would love to be able to just not have to worry about expenses and everything else. And I technically give some of my art away for free simply because I can. They're older pieces and not as big of a deal, so to speak. But ultimately it comes down to, like, for the pieces I'm making, again, it's feast or famine. And I am still not making a living wage doing this. And I am one of the most well-paid cartographers in the industry.
Yep.
And it's true. Like, yeah. And I hate to say it, and I understand because, everyone's feeling the tightening of a belt lately, but also at the same time, you can't fault artists for trying their best to do this for a living and ask for a decent income. It's just like every other job. Whatever other people do for a living, everyone wants to be able to earn enough that they don't feel like they're struggling. Why should we be different? I don't understand this,
Yeah, because even even for me, right? Like, I'm a regular contractor I'm a contracted editor. I'm contracted with Modifius, right? As their editor for Fallout. I'm also a contracted writer for a small indie publisher. So you figure I'm a contracted writer, right? And editor. And I still do not make anywhere near remotely the median income for the state of Florida. And I make I think teachers in Florida still make a little bit more than me, and that's not saying a lot because the state of Florida doesn't pay their teachers well at all to begin with. So and so I'm not. It's one of those things. It's like, when the reality is that even for editors and writers, none of us are paid nearly anywhere near the word of a livable wage. And there's only like one or two like indie publishers who, one is technically not really indie, but they're larger. They're not. It's fine. Whatever. Point is, I'm not getting into the semantics of that. But the point is, there's one publisher who's like, they're small, but they are very consistent. They do very good quality work, and they pay the highest in this industry, and I can attest to that. And because I worked for them, and there's no one, and I've worked for plenty, that come remotely close to their paying price. And the fact of the matter is, the thing is, like, and even that pay is like, we need more of it. We need more of those kinds of jobs, because the reality is you're not going to, if especially when you have publishers who are like asking for, like, they want the best of the best, right? Especially like the large ones like WotC, right? And they want the best of the best, and yet their pay still, while probably better than most, is I haven't personally worked for WotC, but from what I understand, they do pay they pay somewhat decent. And so it's like okay, even if we're talking like the top dog that makes billions of dollars in the industry, the only top dog that makes $1 billion in this industry, right? And the fact that, like, they still don't even pay the highest wage earnable from a smaller company, you're like, okay, clearly something's missing. They have more overhead. They're bigger. They have lots more different costs. So there's different reasons why they have to pay. They charge differently, but the reality is, like, there needs to be something.
No, I genuinely believe that there isn't a conversation happening regarding pay in this industry.
Oh yeah.
Because so many of us get a job or get offered a project, and so many of us like, oh, I need that as a credit, I need to have my name on it, or this will lead to other work or whatever. Like, we're just told, you know, what they're going to pay us by a lot of companies. And I think that we need to change that.
Well, yeah, I agree. Like, I think we have to. I think the thing is too, a lot of these publishers, and especially a lot of other people, they don't expect pushback from like freelancers, right? They don't, like, especially when they say that's too low for me, can you bump it higher, right? And and because I can attest, I've been ghosted before from asking that before, and others have been kind of, and the thing is like, because they don't expect to get any pushback. They just expect people to work for whatever rate you name. And the reality is like, the industry has still a long way to go when it comes to equalizing pay or making more equitable pay, livable pay, and it needs to really it needs to be brought up more often. Like, because what will happen is it'll come up in the discourse once in a while, and then it gets quieted down, and then we repeat this cycle like 6 months later. And because someone worked on like a big prolific project and then finds out that like they got like pittance for their efforts, and it's just like and the reality is like that's very common. And and the thing is like, and the worst thing is, I have to say, is that sometimes, because I've looked at rates from writing professions in other industries and genres, right? And it's wild, because when I looked at like sci-fi writing or fantasy writing, right, like the entry ballpark is like where is almost the same as what most of us in the industry have considered like the bare minimum, which is not even that good at either. Is like 10 cents a word for writing, right? And 10 cents for writing, by the way, for listeners, that's not a livable wage. Just so you know, it's not it's not even minimum wage like livable. It is like absolutely like the lowest you can humanly go. That even with everything, it will amount to. It'll probably go away within 20. It's like not even a month's worth of pay. Like a month's worth of pay. It's easily not even a week. If you do like 10,000 words, 50,000 words, and it's just like, it's not worth it. And the thing is like, but that's like an industry entry level standard. I'm not gonna lie. That is literally an entry level. That's considered entry level for most publishers. And you're like laughing at it because it's like 10 cents does nothing for you. And the thing is, when you look at like other industries of writing, like sci-fi fantasy writing, right? In the Sci-Fi Association, literally, like, you know, they recommend averages like also around 10 to 12 cents, and you're like, who the hell pays that? Why? Why would you do that? And by the way, just so anyone knows, for who wants to fact check it, that was a recommendation from 2019, before the pandemic, by the way. So can you imagine that before the pandemic, they still consider 10 to 12 cents a word a livable wage from even the people who hand out the Hugo Awards?
Right. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous, you know?
Well, even like when I first started in the industry, right? And so we're talking like 2015, right? And which is not that long ago. There were still people in this industry, like actual publishers, who were paying out 3 cents a word for writing.
Yes. Yeah.
That, like, the last 5 years in this industry have been the most monumental amount of monetary change. But it is still so far behind, because when they made the change, that was mostly for the simple demand of the fact that that people want to be paid more equitably, but not including. But the problem is no one factored in inflation yet, which has for the United States, for anyone living in the United States, it's like averaging 12 to 15%. In some places, 20. So it's like with like 10 cents was something we needed like a decade ago. Now if you want something more livable, probably the more ideal number is probably closer to like 30 cents a word or writing.
Right. And again, this is why we have the hustle culture.
Yeah.
This is why
we have burnout. Everyone, all of us, every time, every minute.
There are genuinely times where I'm like, I can't do this. I recently got offered a project and I went to start it, and I immediately
You just said no. I know.
Can't. Because sometimes, as you know, and I create art a lot, but I create art, for myself as well.
Yep.
And
we have to. Yes. We have to create stuff for ourselves. Otherwise, us as creatives literally lose our minds.
Yes. There's nothing worse than feeling like all you do is stuff for other people, and that promotes burnout far quicker than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I went to do the project, and I honestly, it wasn't super difficult or anything else like that. And I sat at my desk the entire day, starting and then restarting and then restarting and then restarting, because absolutely nothing I was doing I liked. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's just the day. And, and I went and played some video games and watched a movie and blah, 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 and then tried to do it the next day. And it was the same thing. And part of that is, it's really hard when you're working in one, you feel like you are always creating other people's ideas. And then you're getting paid. I mean, sometimes you get paid great, but again, it's not stable enough in these types of projects as a freelancer.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, you'll get minimal praise, or you'll get like, oh, that's great, from the art director. And then 90-something% of the time, you don't hear anything about the work that you create. There's very little reward especially in smaller projects, where, at least art-wise, because that isn't always true in other ways, and we have people that, obviously follow our art or our writing, and they'll like, oh my God, now I need to get this because you're involved, which is fantastic. But again, still we'll get, oh, this looks great. That's it. And then it dies down because, within a few days of anything being released, the world fucking forgets. And you're back to like, okay, how do I keep my name out there? How do I keep people wanting to hire me? So you are immediately like, all right, got to move on to the next project.
Yep.
And it's a lot.
It's a lot. No, and I can attest, because like, even though I'm contracted with Modifius, I still do some freelance work from time to time, and it's not, because contractually it's not stipulated anywhere in my contract that I'm exclusively working for Modifius. Right. That's not the same. For I do know for a fact that for Wizards of the Coast, they have an exclusivity clause for their contracts, and so you cannot work for anyone else other than Wizards. And so especially if you're like a designer, specifically a designer, not an artist. Artists are different, but unless you're in one of their like internal artists, again, different. But
So let's quickly explain, especially to anyone who is new to this industry, the difference between being an employee, being a contractor, and being a freelancer. Yeah. Because as an artist, when you're an employee or a contractor, you are considered work for hire, which means that any of the work that you do, the company that you did it for essentially owns it. And you can't resell it, can't do anything really with it. It's still yours because you are the original artist. So it's still considered your art, but it's not something you can resell, and it's now their IP.
Yep.
Right? As a freelancer, you can change that in your contract however you want. But a freelancer is essentially somebody who still will sign a contract, but it doesn't have anything beyond a per project deadline. So there's no like every week, there's no monthly, there's none of that is involved because you're a freelancer. And if there is a timeline involved where like, oh, you're going to work for us for 8 weeks or 2 months or whatever, that's contractual work. As opposed to being an employee, and an employee is obviously full or part-time where like there's no deadline to how long you work. I'm assuming this is the same for writers and editors.
For most cases, for freelancers and contractors, sometimes they're very similar. It really depends on the publisher, because some freelancers can become contractors just by the virtue of it depends. Like for freelance, if you will, as you said, for freelancers, usually it's for per job. You'll get a contract, maybe. Most likely, most of the time they will, especially from a big publisher. It's usually per job, because they have to for legal reasons. But for contractors, you will notice your contract is vastly different, because you will not have a jobs section in yours. Instead, it will detail responsibilities. And that is a totally different matter. So when you have responsibilities, then it dictates basically what you are responsible for, what you are in control of, what you have, what the expectations that you have, and whether it is on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly scale, usually.
And the pay is different for each of these.
Sometimes for contractors and employees, you will expect to see either a salary or some kind of like per hour premium rate. And then in some instances, if you're a contractor, they may sometimes do, depending on what your duties are. Maybe they don't do hourly for like a contractor. They might just do. They might just give you a better rate for the writing and the editing, depending on what it is. And so that is different too. So, that's the difference usually. Contractors are, because the thing is, the idea is that contractors, they're likely to reach out to you for more work, but your availability has to be more open. That's usually what the expectation is. Or in my case, I am the actual editor for Fallout, so that means I actually am regularly working on Fallout. It's not even a euphemism. I am literally working on Fallout all the time. And so that's just one of those things. It's part of my responsibilities, part of my duties, and it's detailed in my contract. Some contracts have start dates and end dates. Like maybe you're only contracted for a certain amount of time. Like if like you said, if for a freelancer, if they want you working for like certain amount of months, then you become a contractor at that point. And I mean, but it will stipulate like when it ends, when it begins, when it ends, stuff like that. And obviously for employees and contractors, for the most part, usually, obviously, you are there until terminated or your contract ends, whichever comes first. The difference with employees is that you actually you're actually an employee. You get the entitlement that comes from being an employee, which for most places in like United States or Western countries, that means you might have access to healthcare, retirement plans, stuff like that. Contractors do not have access to those things.
And that's a big thing to absolutely state, especially when wanting to work in this space. The majority of people who work in tabletop RPGs are contractual or freelancers, which means the majority of us do not have or don't get health insurance through any of these jobs.
No.
We don't have any benefits. We don't have any security plans. We have no retirement plans. None of that is done, even with I've never heard of somebody getting contractual work and having any of those, only as an employee.
Right.
And those are few and far between.
Yeah, and the only thing, and the problem with a lot of, specifically this particular era of contractors, freelancers in general, the problem really stems from the fact that like getting access to healthcare, getting access to retirement, saving retirement plans of any kind, is a humongous financial barrier for anyone in this industry, because unfortunately it makes this entirely unsustainable.
Yes.
And I am one of the very few fortunate souls who has a retirement plan individually, and like I said, I'm really privileged on that front. And I get healthcare from the Affordable Health Care Act. That's the only way I get my healthcare. And I just have to deal with that. But and then it's one of the important things of why for freelancing, if you're coming into it, you have to understand that you are working for yourself. That means also you have to deal with all the tax related things as well with it, on top of the fact that you have healthcare, because Devin, I'm sure you and I have had to have that nice long sit down to ourselves, and probably to someone who is actually an accountant, to basically go, well, where are we at with this, and where do I need to be? So, like, and the thing is, like, it's not something to very take lightly, if you're planning to be really serious about it and being really into it, because the thing is, if you're a contractor or freelancer, you will always run into the problem of that, because of everyone's productions pipelines. A lot of our publishers, not everyone's going to always have work every month or every week. They may have it. What you will see 9 times out of 10 is that there's about a handful every quarter trying to do something, and because of that, and because there's plenty of freelancers and contractors like looking for jobs, it's literally like a fish fry. You're fighting for. You're all in this giant tank looking for a job.
Right, we're all lobsters.
Yeah, we're all lobsters. We all get crusty and full of barnacles.
I was just thinking we're all just waiting to be taken out of the tank and served for dinner, but that'll work.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Pick me.
So it's the thing is, like, a lot of that gets, some of it can get mitigated from like the indie scene and stuff like that. But again, the indie scene is still limited because they cannot do the scaling versus bigger publishers is night and day. It's vastly different. So when you're having like an indie creator hiring you and usually the team might just be you and one other person. Might be a handful of you, like 5, 6 maybe. Sometimes you get lucky and you get to like a larger project that might have like a dozen people in it. But the thing is, it's still difficult for even indie creators, because you're talking about indie creators who are successful enough to pay other freelancers and contractors, and that is still something that not everyone is capable of doing. And the thing is, like, some of these indie creators, sometimes they're paying out of their own pockets because they have a day job, and so they're able to use the second income of their indie creations to keep them afloat, right? Because that's what I used to do. I used to do that. I had a day job and in retail, and I also did RP, and I did freelancing on the side as extra income. And I was, at the time, I was promoting a lot of my stuff from like DM's Guild, TTRPG fairly regularly, and so like all of that was actually like a decent, okay, livable wage for me at that time. Like, I wouldn't say it was like I was living, above the 50 percentile median income in Florida. No, I was nowhere near it. But I could live in a way where I was like, all right, I'm not worried about paying my bills this month. I'm not worried about, if I have an emergency, I can't pay for stuff. Like, unless it's like an exceedingly high amount, then maybe I will be. But it's like, I have emergency money. I have, I can afford, I can eat reasonably okay and stuff like that, and I don't feel like I'm ultra pressured to like.
We're
look
not
for
constantly
jobs
living on ramen every day.
Yeah, right. And and ramen's going up too. That's the worst. That's when you know the world is ending.
Right? Oh my god, no! Anything but that.
When the ramen has to go up in price, we all messed up in some capacity.
Right? Jesus. Anything, you would figure, that is such a staple.
It's like when you hear the eggs price going up because there was a bird flu pandemic that wiped out a bunch of chickens in like Asia, and you're like, okay, I guess that will affect us for a bit. But no, when the ramen starts going up, you're like, okay, wait a minute.
We're fucked.
It's like you're like, wait a minute. This Manchurian pack here used to be 10 cents. What do you mean it's 25 cents now?
Right.
No. that's literally another pack and a half that I could have had.
Wait, what the hell is this shit?
So
how do I buy in bulk enough that it's still 10 cents a pack?
Like what the fuck what the fuck did you do to cause this to go up? And then and among other things. Like so the thing is like cost is going up and prices and wages need to catch up because we are all trying to just we just want to live, okay? We don't even want to like live in luxury. Like we just want to at least be able to like go, okay, I don't feel like I'm gonna panic if there's an emergency in my bank and I have money in my bank account, to pay for some of this emergency, whatever. It's like, I mean, that's literally like the state of comfort most people are just trying to achieve presently, let alone like the idea of, oh yeah, I can now buy a yacht. Like, I really don't want to. But first of all, I wouldn't want the expenses for that. That's awful. Anyways, so like it's just one of those things. Like the disparity of just. I wouldn't even say the disparity, just more like the gap that people think of the perception of like what people think they need to be comfortable versus like people thinking, oh, we just want to succeed. It's like, no. Those two things can be the same thing, but also succeeding is also vastly a different thing. But we just want to live. That's the bare minimum we're trying to achieve right now, and we're nowhere near that word. And it's just like,
I just want to safely be able to pay like my rent or my mortgage and buy food and not feel like I have to pick between electric that month or and obviously we don't have a choice. Internet's how we make a livelihood, so that has to be paid. But it's like, maybe I will live on ramen this month because that's all I got left over.
Yeah, I mean, because especially for like freelancing now, especially in this modern era of, it's like everything's remote or mostly remote, and the thing is like we literally have to rely on the internet. And so when we hear the nonsense of like a country like the United States, for example, not considering making internet a public utility, that we get angry because it's like we literally live on the internet now. I don't know what to tell you. And so. It's just one of the many things that for a freelancer you have to really be considerate of, like the things you need to function as a freelancer, right? Because like we both like Devin, you and I need the internet. We need the internet to literally do anything. And the thing is, like, I had an F2 tornado come down like not even a mile from my house a couple months ago, and I lost power for like 2 days, and that disrupted my ability to work. And it's like, it's a reality like we have to live with, and like that's just the thing. Natural disasters are a thing, and you could lose power, and when power goes out, there's nothing you can do. And for a freelancer, that is probably like the most terrifying thing, especially when you have deadlines. Because now you're in a position where you might not be able to fulfill your deadline, and also you have no power, so your phone might be slowly dying, and therefore you don't even have enough time you might just barely be able to get an email through to just be like, I cannot fulfill this deadline, probably just FYI. And stuff like that, because like, and the thing is, like, especially like where I live in Florida, we go through hurricane season, and probably this year, as it's forecasted to be probably the most violent hurricane season, unless by sheer miracle we avoid it all. And so like I even had to forewarn, a lot of my contractors and employers and whatever, and tell them like, hey, just so you're aware, this is going to be a thing in Florida, and so there might be occasionally a delay on things, because a giant hurricane is coming whirling my way, and because FP&L has lobbied to basically never be sued by any civilian for not upgrading their tech ever, or their infrastructure for that matter. So therefore, I can only voice my anger and not be able to sue them. So I get to deal with a flimsy infrastructure. That's great.
Not even to mention what it's like for those of us that are disabled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're disabled, it's much worse.
Yeah. There's aside from the fact of like, okay, yeah, we don't have regular insurance or anything else. We have to hope that we make enough to either get it through the Affordable Care Act. There we go, or something similar. But on top of that, we still have everything for us is pretty much out of pocket. And because we have no employee benefits or anything else, working a regular job, but yet for a lot of us, this is the best kind of job that we can hope for. So a perfect example of this is I have an immune disorder, and it causes me to have sporadic fatigue. And I don't mean like, oh, I just, don't have any energy. I mean, I can't stay awake if I tried, and I will just literally just fall asleep because I am absolutely exhausted. And it can be random, and it can be random from day to day or week to week, and I have no control over it. So, I can't, it's impossible to tell a regular employer, like, I'm good now, but I have no idea what tomorrow or the next week or whatever is going to bring. So having a regular 9-to-5 job for a lot of disabled people is not even an option.
Nope. I mean, even for me too, because like I deal with chronic pain all the time, and and the thing is, some days I'm good, other days most of the time it's tolerable, and then the worst days, the pain is so severe I cannot work, and I'm literally just bedridden for the whole day. And it's just one of those. And the thing is, like, it gets harder, especially for like disabled, for those of us who are disabled, or for those of us for people who go through like chronic pain or other difficulties. And it doesn't get better when you get older, by the way, most of the time.
No, it doesn't.
And so for those of us that are aging through the industry, it's like we just have, it's just like that daunting feeling every time of just going, how much longer can I get away with this before it really becomes a problem?
Yeah.
And
there is a reason I was like, maybe I'll start a podcast, because it doesn't require me drawing for a ridiculous amount of time every day till I eventually give myself arthritis to the point where I can't create. All of us need to find other forms of income in order to sustain this for a living. So I'm hoping that this, I can, as I can just talk forever.
Oh yeah. Well, we both can. Hey, you know what we could do? We could always just do a food-only podcast and just literally rave about stuff for like hours on end.
We might be the only people listening to it, though.
That is also true.
But no, we can talk. We can talk food until we're blue in the face. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. But I feel you on that. I feel you on the arthritis, because I unfortunately have it in my knuckles, in my fingers.
Yeah.
Because that actually made me stop playing the piano because of that, because the pain is very severe.
Yeah.
So, which is funny, because they're like, well, how about typing? I'm like, typing doesn't use as much pressure as like literally playing a Chopin piece or a Beethoven piece.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
I literally just tap. I have a mechanical keyboard too, so it's like tapping is very gentle relative to that.
Yeah. So I do want to. Apparently I wanted to hiccup. I do want to, for all of the negativity that we are talking about, I do want to talk about the positive side to it.
Oh yeah.
Why we do this. Let's talk about like the best parts of it, because I love that moment where somebody comes up to me and tells me a story about a map that they've used, or have someone like, can I have your art tattooed on me? Or
oh yeah,
you know,
I started remembering when I started getting private messages on my Twitter of people running my adventures and asking me for permission to either stream it, record it, or whatever, and I'm just like, you don't really need it. I don't have the time to like have lawyers hunting people down. It's like,
right.
I'm like, I wouldn't have known otherwise, but thank you for letting me know. But yeah, like I think that was when I started realizing, like, oh, people actually do read my stuff. Wow.
Right.
And so I think for me, I will always remember the fact that like when people do reviews, I think that's the other thing too. When people do reviews of my stuff and I'm just going, what? People review my stuff? I know they're not the greatest things in the world, but geez. But yeah, I think one of my favorite ones is it was for like a 1-page TTRPG I wrote, and it was for it fits like in a little brochure, and it was like a space themed one, and somebody reached out to me saying that they were going to stream on their Twitch, and they just wanted to let me know, and they thought the game was really cool, and they really are looking forward to playing it out and everything. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I looked at their profile and saw the link for their Twitch. So I decided to hop in and watch them play it, just because I had time, and it was like on a weekend too. So I had time at that moment. So I said, yeah, I have time. I can watch this. And so I watched the whole thing. I commented towards the end of the stream, just saying, hey, y'all did a great job. And they're like, oh my God, you're in the chat. And I'm just like, I'm just here, and I enjoyed what you did, and it was great. And it was great to see the game run, and because I just like for you, like having someone come up to you say like, I'm using your stuff, I'm enjoying what you did, and it's a very satisfying feeling.
Yes.
Knowing that you didn't just make something for the sake of making something, and that somebody's actually using your stuff, and and they're enjoying it, and they get to build memories with it, and things like that. I think that's always been one of the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, I think that, and I highly encourage this, if you have a favorite author, writer, whatever, always let them know. Because even if we say very little more than like, thank you, it's usually because we don't know what the fuck to say.
Yeah, we really don't, because as you have said, we don't get a lot of praises through our processes.
Right.
Like for generally, like I'm not that way. I'm usually a lot more. I put a lot of exclamation points on my stuff. But anyways, but in general, like we don't hear a whole lot other than, oh, this is great, or this needs to be changed, this needs to be adjusted, or whatever. And so there's a point where we're like, we created something, but we don't feel anything afterwards, because we're just like, okay, we did it, and I guess it's the next thing. We're on to the next thing because we have to, because otherwise we're not going to pay our bills. So we don't even get to enjoy the fact that we made something, because it's like we have to literally do the next thing. And I unfortunately have I have such an ADHD memory that the problem is for me is sometimes I forgot I even did something. So because I'm on to the next thing already, both for my ADHD and for the fact that I need to pay my bills. And so it's just like, it's a double whammy of me literally forgetting that I worked on something. And so sometimes I'll see something get released and I'm like, did I work on that? I feel like I worked on it. Oh, I did work on it. And so it's like, which is terrible when you're trying to update your resume or your portfolio, because you're just like, I don't remember what I worked on. And then you also go, and then the other half of it is like, in our industry is like, is this under an NDA? Is this under an NDA? What is under an NDA? That's the worst. And because now for some companies it's easy, because like for WotC there's a blatant NDA. It's not even a joke, and it's like you already know it's coming. And but like some publishers, like they don't have any, or some are just like they don't really legally have a binding like NDA, but they're like, please don't say anything until we're ready to like reveal it and everything. And you're like, okay, and you forgot the entire time. You're just like, right, and so. It's always a combination of that. It's either an NDA or some vague part of like, maybe don't say anything until it's revealed, or there's no NDA, you can say whatever you want, and it's just like, and so sometimes you're just like, you're literally doing Schrodinger's NDA. Is like, okay, is this an NDA or not?
right. See, I actually have a list because of all the different people I work with. I have a list. One, I have. Everybody has to have a process now to work with me, because I am so tired of weird shit happening. Everyone has to have a contract, blah, blah, blah. So I actually have a pipeline that they all follow in order for me to work with them. And I specifically have like NDA or not, because there's way too many. And it's not even like I work with so many people. It's because so many people don't fucking release their products until well after I've worked on them. So I have things that I literally have done over 2 years ago that still have yet to be released.
Yeah, it happens.
Right. So I won't, and as far as I know, it's still not going to be released up until I think 2025.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, especially for like NDAs, you could be in that really sad situation where you worked on something, you finished it, you turned it in, and then like the owner, the whoever you turned it into, like the owner, the company, the publisher, whatever, goes, yeah, we're not going to end up using it, and you're like, great, I still can't say anything. This sucks.
Oh yeah, I have something like that I worked on years ago.
Yeah,
and it's one of the reasons why I've changed my contract to specifically state, if you don't use it within a year of whatever deadline or whatever, that I'm allowed to publish it under, my name and sell it and blah, blah, blah. But so help me, I didn't have that in my initial contract. So I still have something that I made 2017.
Oh, speaking of clauses, one big one for this podcast. Make sure if you're a freelancer or a contractor, you have an exit clause in your contracts.
Yes.
Jesus Christ, the amount of contracts that exist out there, and even from big ones, where there's not a single exit clause. There's a termination clause, which is not the same thing. And it's like, and I'm just baffled all the time.
Right. Let's talk about what that is and why that's necessary.
Right. So an exit clause is, so the difference between that and a termination clause. So a termination clause is usually when somebody wants to terminate specifically the contract, right? And versus an exit clause, which is we want to uphold the contract, but we're amicably separating. And that's usually that's the general gist between a exit clause versus a termination clause. So the termination is that the contract will end up void and null, and parties all move on. Exit clause is the contract is still inact, and sometimes there will also be a point where the contract is no longer applicable, but it depends. But generally speaking, it's like the contract is still in effect, but the pursuants, the claimants, and the contractor are moving away from this, and we're moving beyond it, and so you're separating. Usually, and the thing is, like, that is usually a thing you want to have, especially when maybe, for example, because it's happened to either myself or others who've dealt with this in the industry, where you're working on something and partway through maybe there's a conflict of interest, or conflicting ideas or conflicting decisions where decisions are not where you don't agree with the decisions made and there's conflicts there, and but you want to get compensated for your pay because for any time and pay you committed, and therefore you want to have an exit clause because if you don't have an exit clause, well, you could run into a situation where they're not legally obligated to pay you. Right. And so basically you could have spent like months working on something and literally have nothing for it, like literally nothing to show for it. Right. And it's one of those things that not a lot of you don't see it a whole lot of times in contracts, because most of the publishers usually expect that people who take up their contracts will just work the job and get it done as fast as they can, and sometimes they may need extensions or otherwise, whatever. And there's also stipulations for that too. But again, the whole point is like an exit clause is mostly to protect you as a freelancer, and also, and that's more for anything else, because the contract already exists to protect the publisher. That's the whole point. They have one, or they give you one. Right. So if you're the freelancer or the contractor who is issuing a contract, obviously you should also still include an exit clause for yourself, because you never know what happens. Because you never know when things go wrong, when things go awry, or when you just don't agree with this and you're just like, I want out. So you always want to have an exit strategy, as they say. You want to have an exit clause as well, because you really don't know when something just doesn't work out. Right.
I'm actually going to go in a podcast. Let's try this again. I'm actually going to have an episode in which I'm going to go over some contracts, some jargon, some help with how this goes. I want to state, however, that an exit clause is specifically to help protect either you as a contractor or freelancer, as well as perhaps the company, depending on whether or not they realize how it works.
Yeah, that one especially.
Right. Because again, if you're the company hiring other people, then you usually have a termination clause. And this just means that, this project isn't working, or that particular freelancer isn't working, and we're just going to terminate and null and void this contract. This isn't, we're not going forward at all.
Right.
However, this doesn't immediately mean that they're not going to pay you. It usually means that they will, because that's a part of the clause. Usually. Can't stress that word enough. Usually.
Yeah, I can attest. I've seen some termination clauses that don't say it anywhere.
Right. Now, here's one of the reasons why you should absolutely learn a structure of a contract, because you can state anywhere else. I specifically have a section in my contract that talks explicitly about how I'm getting paid, how much, and by when. Because even if there's a termination or exit clause or whatever, I still minimally will get paid this. And even if the person doesn't want to, I have a legal leg to stand on in court.
Yep.
So wording of your contract is really, really important. However, the difference between the two is one basically makes it null and void, and another one allows you to very amicably just end a project.
Sometimes it's not amicably, but
no, but as far as a court would be concerned,
from a court's perspective, it is considered amicable.
Yes. And the reason that's a huge deal is that someone else can't, unless you're purposefully or with intention not fulfilling your contract as stated, and you don't have this clause in there, you can be sued for that work. That is entirely possible, especially if they have given you any payment at all.
Yep.
But this is a small industry, and the majority of people don't pay you. And this is what really sucks. You don't get paid the majority of the time until not only is the work done, but approved.
Yeah, that is something that happens, especially for some of the larger publishers, because
Yes,
especially if you're working for a publisher and you're working on a property that uses an IP from someone else.
yes.
So, like, for example, if you ever see any TTRPGs made from, say, like Star Wars, things like that, or Star Trek even, or other movies and other franchises, right? They have to deal with their IP owners, so whoever owns them at the time. And there might be an approval process. Most do. And the thing is, you have an additional step on top of the editing, which is there's an approval process. Yep. And the thing is, if you're like a writer, you probably will not see your payout until after approvals, which could be way after copy editing phase or way after layout and proofreading, which is a long time. And that is probably the worst.
As an artist, we're more likely to see it first, because usually, stress the word, usually, we get, well, I shouldn't say that we get paid immediately after it. We usually get to submit our full invoices once the work has been approved, but that's once the final work is done.
Right.
So to put it in perspective, if I am doing a world map and it takes me 4 to 6 weeks to make it, then I have to submit the draft. That draft has to be approved however long that approval process is. And then I get the time to make the map in the 4 to 6 weeks. And then that has to be approved and any edits done and blah, blah, blah. And then that gets colored and then that gets approved and then...
Yep.
So, we're talking easily, 2 months here.
Yeah, 2-3 months easy on top of it.
Where this is the only thing that I have the time to do because it's such a large project. So I don't get to do any other work. I'm not getting paid by anything. This is it. So, and that's really hard to budget when you are doing this for a living. You can't assume anything, which is what makes it so hard, which is why things like Patreon are so important. Because at least, granted, it's monthly, but at least it's a lot easier to kind of like, all right, I definitely have this stable income that I know is coming in. Oh, thank the gods, because, I'm still working on a 2-month project. And then, even once I get to submit the invoice, a lot of them pay within 90 days.
Yeah.
So we're talking 6 months of no pay.
Yeah, exactly. Listeners are probably wondering why does it take so long? Because for the 90-day payouts, so if you're using a bank, you cannot pay out until you pay, unless you have the money physically to do so. Because obviously, you would be the equivalent of bouncing a check. So, and so you wouldn't have funds. You would overdraft. So you're not allowed to actually pay out. The banks would never let you pay out unless you have the funds to do so. And so you have to go, and the thing is, usually for the larger publishers, there's an accountant of some variety, or an accountant team. And so because of that, so you have to go through some of the bureaucracy. Someone has to approve the invoice, then they have to call the invoice, which is somebody has to then make sure that there's money available, and then set up the process of sending money to the account that's stated in the invoice, and then that goes to the bank, which then goes to you. And it's or if you're doing, especially if you're doing bank, like checking or ACH transfers, that's how that works. Now, if you're doing it through PayPal, still the same thing. The only difference is now they have to make sure that then they have to just do it through PayPal. That's all.
Yeah, and most bigger companies are not going to pay you through PayPal.
Well, no one wants to pay the extra fees, and or if they do, or now the thing is, I will say this: some a lot of remote companies will do PayPal just because of the convenience.
Yes.
And because a lot of their contractors are 90% of them are remote. Okay, and that's just how it is. And it's necessary, especially for like a lot of people who also are freelancers, not just like United States or in Europe. It's like because this will help a lot of this. This is also useful for obviously contractors in like Asia, the global South, etc. So that's why it depends on your situation how you handle the payout. Like some companies do not contract outside the United States. That's just how they are because it's easier for them to do the accounting, and that's valid. Yep. And some are international, and they know that the fees and the conversions are just going to get eaten up, and there's nothing they can do about it. Right. Hopefully, they would give you a better wage to mitigate that, but some don't.
No.
And so it's just one of those things that you have to be mindful of too, because now some publishers, like every publisher is going to be different in terms of how they do payout. What Dev and I have stated is really the epitome of like dealing with IPs, like especially with specifically publishers who happen to work with IPs, especially like that is like you have all that gauntlet to go through before you get paid. Other publishers are a little quicker with the uptake of pay, and others are and there's a few that are large that still pay by check, which baffles me.
Yep.
And I'm just like, okay, you pay by check, okay.
Right. Why do you do this?
Why do you do this in the age when we can't even trust U.S. Postal for anything?
Right. Oh my God.
If you are fortunate to ever work in freelancing or of any variety, and your pay is in a form that is quick and painless and feeless, congratulations to you. You've made it where most cannot, because that is very difficult to achieve.
Yes, it is.
So like, actually, speaking of which, one of the publishers I just worked for, they do wire ACH transfers, and I was like, thank you, I will take the money. I'm so grateful. But yeah, so sometimes you don't have that luxury. You have to kind of take whatever form is available to you, and just be mindful of that. The only reason we can't be specific about some of this is because some publishers have in their NDAs we cannot talk about their practices and methods of like how they operate business. So we cannot be specific on some of them. So if you're wondering why we can't be specific about certain things, because we're still affected by their NDA still. We can't really say much.
However, thankfully enough, that is more editors and writers than it is artists.
Yeah, it's definitely more. Yeah, the artists are a little bit different, but it is. I will say though, like I feel for the times though when the artists have to go through approvals, because I'm just going, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you, because that was like months of work, and you're just waiting.
Speaking of Magic the Gathering cards, the amount of normal approval that you have to get to do any artwork, especially with Wizards of the Coast, is at times, it's a process in that, like, you submit your art, right? I know, it's a process, all right. You submit your art director either immediately gives you notes and then you fix it from there. If they don't have any notes, then it goes to, like who's working with the project and everything else, coordinator. And then usually, stress the word, usually, that might go to one or two other people at best, and then it comes back to you, and so we're talking, 2-3 weeks, for approval. With the Magic the Gathering cards, because
you have to include the Tolkien estate.
Yes, we did, and they were so slow to get back. And you've seen all the artwork. There's a lot that they were going through. Yeah. So I had at one point, so I was contacted in like November of 2021. about doing these cards. And I finished them in like May of 2022. You know, and it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, you know, like it's great. The cards and artwork were still done pretty much in 2021 because I know the lands by heart. You know, so there was like a couple of edits, a little bit of back and forth, but everything was pretty much done in like January at the latest. So I had to wait like 4 months to hear anything back before it was like, yo, no, it's finally approved.
So for Fallout, when I was writing for Winter of Adam, and so we did different stages of writing because we had pre-production writing, which was we had an editor writing like a lot of like the basic concepts of like the lore, the style guide, among other things, and then we had a person doing some world building, and then I was coming in to do mechanics, so I was handling like combat and monster creation and stuff like that, and then I had to come back later to do stat blocks for the majority of the campaign, and so the first things I submitted for approvals for Bethesda were the combat stuff, and that was like an entire appendix of just like how to design encounters, build encounters, and everything else. And so we sent that in. It was like near the end of 2021, I want to say, like near the end of it. And then I think we got some approvals back by March or April, and then I submitted the rest of the stat blocks later, and then there was a long period where we never heard back from Bethesda because that was the same because you have to understand that was 2020, that was like around like 2022, right? That was like springtime. That was right around the time when they were about to announce Starfield. So when I saw the announcement for Starfield, I just went, I see why there's a delay now. It's like I wondered why there was a delay. Now that explains everything. And plus it was like the last E3. So like before people realized that was the last E3. So it was like between E3 and all the other shows they went to. And I'm just going, I see why there's a problem.
Yeah.
And when we finally got the full manuscript approved, it was like almost roughly a year since I joined and signed up, which was like around Q3 of 2021. So like near the end of Q3, we was like done, and it was like manuscript was approved and everything, and I was just like, oh good God.
Right.
Oh my God. And like I was just like, oh my God, it's been so long. Because even myself, and my family was like, they were like, because they knew I worked on like something big that took a lot of my time. They were like, is it done yet? I'm like, no. Nowhere near the word. Nowhere near the word. and you know, I had to wait for the majority of that before I got paid. And can you imagine?
Yes. Can
you imagine waiting? Yeah. So you have to. So like, you know, waiting almost a year and change from when I signed the contract to like literally when the approvals were pretty much done. It's like that is nowhere near the word sustainable and anywhere. No. Like, especially for the amount of money I was paid. Okay, like. It's like
even if you get paid a lot, you know, it's you have to have an income to pay for it while you're waiting to actually get paid.
Right.
And then it's all in one lump sum that you have to now make work for the rest of the year or however long.
Right. But that's not livable, because you have to figure everyone has credit card bills. So we're paying monthly for credit card bills, but us as freelancers, our pays are not monthly. That's why it's so important to have like monthly platforms like Patreon or whatever, because that's what keeps freelancers up to date with their bills to not pile up. Right. But the reality is like when we get paid, that immediately goes into the bigger expenses that we have to take care of, like, you know, our rent, our mortgage, whatever. And if we're lucky to do rescheduling for like certain big things that require a lot of money, right? If we can, we might change it to like quarterly if we're lucky.
Right.
And that's the only way we can mitigate that, right? And it's just because, like, what was it? I remember I changed my health my health insurance and life insurance payouts to differently, just so I could, you know, dance around the fact that, you know, freelancing sometimes they don't pay in a consistent basis, and that way, when I get a chunk of cash, it can just pay, and I can just hold on to it for like maybe a couple weeks, and then it'll go for that quarter, and I don't have to worry about it. Because like, and plus, like, if you're in TTRPGs, like, there's like seasons of like when jobs are available.
Yeah.
Because like, so for those who are listening, it's like, so you ever notice there's no Kickstarters usually around like the springtime? Yeah, no, because everyone's planning for the Kickstarters for this year and next year, and so there's usually no Kickstarters. There's very few. The ones who do, if you ever look at them and if you ever pay attention to them, because I used to do this when I was like blogging for a small little outlet. It's like, you don't most of those campaigns don't make a lot of money unless it's like from a big IP, and otherwise they don't make a whole lot of money. And the thing is, the biggest times of the year for Kickstarters is always in the late springs and during the summer, especially during like the times of Gen Con. That's usually when you start seeing the surge. So usually, your bell curve is that you'll start seeing more jobs or more offerings of jobs like around like the late spring, summertime, because the Kickstarters will kick in, the campaigns will kick in. When they wrap up in a month, they start hiring out the freelancers so they can start building the stuff that they promised that they'll deliver or distribute, right? And then you'll see it slow down as it gets closer to the holiday months, mostly because usually the availability of people to work really is what it is. Because like, I know, like, when we do, like, because usually like some freelancers, if you have the privilege to, you're going to tell yourself, I'm not going to work during the holidays. I'm not taking I'm not taking gigs during the holidays. If you're privileged enough to do so, you will probably say that. Now, whether you'll do it,
but you will say it.
You will say it. Now, whether you do it is a completely different matter altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like, so sometimes you'll see like maybe a few sprinklings of gigs near the winter months, like the later half, like the last few months of the year, but you won't always see a lot. Trust me. Right. And because it's getting to the holidays, any of the bigger publishers, they usually have like a week or two where no one is in the office is closed. So, and if you're in the smaller scale side, people might just choose to spend in the holidays instead of actually, you know, producing, because they already had to do that the rest of the year. So, you know, so you're always going to see the bell curve fit around like the summertime and like and maybe the early spring, because they'll want to get all these people hired or contracted in and secure them. So then when they do the campaigns, they get the funding for the campaigns, then they start everybody working in the end of the summer, the fall seasons, and then they'll hopefully have a manuscript all ready and done by the end of the year, and then they can release the book by spring or either spring or summer of the next year. Ideally, that's the ideal world, but it's that does in production that doesn't always happen.